Now, if you've been following along, here in this next section, we'll be diving into editable polygon functions. And this is where we really start to kind of reveal the major toolbox here inside of 3ds Max in an effort to go above and beyond just basic primitives and let you really start to customize your shapes to give you something a little closer to what you're probably looking for those game props that you're ready to make. Also in this lesson, we'll start looking at additional ways to customize the user interface with some custom toolbars, as well as showcase a few additional UI tricks and tips to kind of help you speed up and improve your workflow throughout your modeling. Now to begin with, let's start by talking about exactly what editable polygons are. Now when you create a 3D object, we'll start with just a basic box. We'll drag this guy out, and then right-click on the object that you want to convert to editable poly. Down here along the bottom, you'll see if you hover your mouse up and down these menus, we'll go to convert to editable poly. Now after we've done this, you'll notice that we have a lot of new options and menu items that have popped up over here along the right hand side on the command panel. If we hover our left mouse button around the left side of this window, you'll notice that the icon switches to an arrow pointing to the left and the right, and we can drag this out a little bit further so that we have a little bit of a better idea of all of the additional menus that are hiding underneath here. So if we zoom in on our object, what we notice right off the bat along selection is here at the very top we have 5 different options. We have vertex, edge, border, polygon, and element. You'll also notice that as we toggle through each of these different menu modes, this icon up here along the right-hand side of our editable polygon object also seems to change. This is reflecting the current SubObject mode that you are currently in, to kind of give you a quick visual idea that coincides with the menu items that you have here. Now what this basically means is that every single object that you create can be represented and is made up of these 5 things. And so for example, if we are in Vertex mode, which is the first of the SubObject modes, you'll notice that now we have these small dots which are individually selectable. And so if you think about the object being made up of sub-objects, and then if we wanted to exit out of sub-object mode by simply highlighting the word editable poly here on the command panel, now we go back into object mode. And so what that basically means is that we have the individual object itself, but then we have these sub-objects which are individually manipulatable, independent of the entire object. And so for example, here we have vertex selected. If we go to edge selection, you'll notice that now we can select individual edges of this box and manipulate that. Now the border selection is generally only used if you have an open hole in a mesh. And so for example, let's quickly switch over to Polygon mode, and we'll talk about him in just a minute, but you'll see that we have large polygons. We can delete one of them. And with border mode is simply a selection mode that can basically allow you to select and address individual open holes of that static mesh. Now, as we mentioned about Polygon mode, polygons are basically the space and the visual 3D surface that is rendered in between vertices and edges. And we can grab a polygon as a whole and sort of move him left and right, up and down as needed. Now the element mode, this is traditionally utilized when you have, let's say, 2 objects and we make a copy of it over here, and I'm just going to kind of run through this quickly, and we'll cover the specifics of these tools in just a minute. But element mode is basically when you have 2 individual pieces of what is considered one single object after you have attached them together. And so this is a tool that we'll be utilizing a little bit later, but basically it just means that once you have 2 objects that have become one, you can quickly go down back into the element mode and select that individual piece of that specific object. And so if you also wanted to get rid of an element, you can grab the entire element mode itself and just press the delete key. Now these are the basic 5 sub-objects that allow you to manipulate independent of the entire object itself. Now the quick hotkey to toggle back and forth between vertex, edge, and polygon, etc. is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And to quickly get back into object mode, all you need to do is just left click on the individual name here up in editable polygon mode. And so a brief recap of that is essentially that if we create any object as a standard primitive to start with, grab the object, right click, convert to editable poly. Now we have an editable poly where we can quickly switch back and forth if we use our hotkeys to manipulate the geometry in interesting and unique ways. Now, just the basics of move, rotate, and scale is not quite going to give us everything that we need, but it is going to be probably the majority of your manual operations that you'll be doing when you are sort of making adjustments to the static mesh. And so, for example, you may start working on an object and kind of realize, well, this is close, but I need to move it a little bit differently, or I need to rotate it, or maybe I need to delete something. And as we start to explore all of the additional tools to sort of help you really understand the power of all the different functions that you can use in SubObject Mode, this is where it really starts to come to life. And so to begin with, let's exit out of this by, we're going to drag select everything in the scene and hit delete, delete. And if our grid is missing, we can press G to bring up the grid. Or you could also just click on the 3ds Max icon and go ahead and hit the reset button. And when the dialog box pops up, we'll say no, we don't want to save, and that yes, we do want to reset. And so from here, let's go ahead and maximize our viewport. And so just a quick UI trick I want to show you before we get into the editable polygon functions is here along the top of the command panel, if you hover your mouse just underneath where each of the tabs are here, you'll notice that the icon has turned into two little boxes next to it. What that means is it's allowing you to hold down the left mouse button and pop the command panel off, which is really, really helpful if you're working on a secondary monitor. You can grab this and sort of drag it over into your other screen, and this will give you a little bit more screen real estate here along the left-hand side. Now, once it's on your secondary monitor, obviously you can drag it out. You could look at all the different menus a little bit easier, a little bit clearer. And this just gives you a bit more space to work with here in 3D space. You could also right-click on the top bar here and select Dock, and you could dock it here on the left-hand side if you wanted to. Or you could right-click, dock it back to the right-hand side in case you have it floating and you want to reseat it up along the top here. And if you just so happen to accidentally pull the command panel out and you accidentally close it, not to worry. You can find it under Customize, Show UI, Show Command Panel. And this will bring it back up wherever it was at. Now, since I'm just working with one screen here, I'll go ahead and dock it back to the right and drag it back over. Right about here is good. We're going to be looking at quite a few menus, so I'll leave it expanded out just a bit more. Also here along the bottom, we have the track bar. We won't necessarily be using that right now. So under Customize, Show UI, we're going to turn Show Track Bar off. That'll give us a little bit more space as well. And we're also not going to cover the graphite modeling tools just yet, but we will eventually. So we can toggle them off by clicking on this folder with a little light bulb here next to it. That'll toggle that bar off for right now. So since we're not using it, we can hide some of these features that we're not going to be utilizing. And now that we have our UI a little bit more customized, if we want to save this, we can go to Customize, Save Custom UI Scheme, and then here in the default UI folder, this should be fine. If you want to set this as your new Max Start UI, you can. Or you could give it a separate name and then load it up whenever you're working on the computer that you're at if you want to load up this UI instead. For now, we can go ahead and save this as my Start UI. Hit Save. We'll make sure everything is selected. Press OK. And another thing that we will set is under Customize. We'll click on Lock UI Layout. What this will do is this will help us to make sure that we don't accidentally peel off different parts of the menu that we did not intend to. Sometimes it can be easy as you're modeling to accidentally strip off a piece of this. It can get a little frustrating, so for now we'll make sure it's locked. Now, even though it's locked, you will still be able to drag out certain parts of the UI, which is fine, but at least we won't have to worry about hiding our command panel on accident. So to get started, let's click on the Create tab and let's make sure we're working with geometry. And we'll start with the classic box. Right click, convert to editable poly. We'll zoom in on it with the Z hotkey. And we're not really going to use the grid right now, so I'll turn that off with the G hotkey. We won't need the bounding box. J is the hotkey to turn that bounding box on and off. And F4 is the toggle on and off for our topology. And so as I go through and I start demonstrating some of these, those are just a few of the quick hotkeys that you'll need to know. So let's start with the basic fundamentals of Vertex. Now right away, you'll notice that I have these very, very small vertices. And so one thing that I like to do immediately once I start modeling on a new computer, or if I've just installed Max for the first time, is under Customize, Preferences. Here under the Viewports tab, we can set Show Vertices as dot size. I'll go ahead and turn this up to about 5 and click OK. This will show the vertices a little bit larger, so they're a little bit easier to see, making it a bit easier for us to select and manipulate. And so to start with, looking at our menu items that we have here inside the command panel, one thing that is important to notice is that if you hold your left mouse button anywhere along the gray area, you do have the ability to pull this up and down. Just like before when we were looking at our basic primitives, you can also use your scroll wheel to view all the different menu items here. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that we won't necessarily be using everything in this menu. So it can be a little daunting at first when you see all these different menu items to say, oh man, I'm never going to be able to learn all these. But not to worry, because we won't actually be utilizing the majority of these for most of what we do here in the game asset modeling course. And so with that in mind, one customization that you can do is if you simply left click on the title of the menu bar that you aren't using, this will expand or collapse that menu and all the different options and functions inside of it. And so another thing that you can also do is you can rearrange it. If we go ahead and minimize some of these, if you hold down the left mouse button, you can sort of drag it around and you'll see this blue bar pop up. And this allows you to reorder the menu options that you would need in something that's a little bit more customized to your personal preference. Now, things like vertex properties, subdivision surface, subdivision displacement, and paint deformation, we won't use this a whole lot, but I know that I'll use a little bit of soft selection as well as paint deformation occasionally, whereas the majority of the rest of them I'm just going to leave down here in the bottom right hand corner, kind of tucked away, because we won't be getting into most of this stuff at all. So this is a little less intimidating when we have a little bit of a smaller menu size here to know that, okay, well, at least that's about half of the ones that we saw at first. And so just remember, you can always reorder these in any way that you want by simply holding down the left mouse button or expanding it by left clicking on the title. And so when we begin with, if we look at Vertex Mode, there's a couple things you'll notice that now, once we've selected our vertice, if we hold down the Alt and middle mouse button, the camera sort of starts to rotate around that sub-object that we have selected. And so, for example, if we click on Polygon, you'll notice that the camera is sort of orbiting specifically around that area. But there is a setting that you can do to really ensure that the camera operates the best way for your usage. And the way that we can do that is down here in the very far bottom right-hand corner. What we want to do is we want to make sure that this is set to Orbit Sub-Object. And if you hover your mouse over it, you'll see it, which it looks like that's what I'm set to here. But yours may or may not have been set to it. It may have been set to Orbit or Orbit Selected. And so you really want to make sure that you drag that down, and you'll see a small green color in the top right-hand corner. And this ensures that the camera will rotate specifically around the sub-object that you have selected. And so one quick thing that you can do is you can grab a selection of your sub-objects, for example, these vertices, press Z to zoom in and frame those vertices, and now as you truck the camera around, you'll see that the camera orbits around it. And so you're going to want to check that and make sure that you have that set on your personal viewport as well.